My name is Essie. I'm 58 years old, and I learned the hardest lesson of my life while lying in a hospital bed too weak to lift my own head. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, cold and indifferent, as I stared out the window at fields I could no longer walk through. Fields I'd worked for 35 years. I thought about my son Brandon, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died. I kept waiting for him to visit, believing family still meant something. But something felt wrong. The way he looked at me last time, like I was already gone, like I was just an obstacle between him and whatever he wanted. I had no idea what was coming. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if stories like this touch your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe. Because what I'm about to share, it changed everything I thought I knew about family. Trust me, you'll want to hear how a dying woman taught her greedy son the most expensive lesson of his life. Let's continue. I need to take you back a bit so you understand who I was before all this happened, before the hospital, before the betrayal, before I became just another sick old woman fighting for her last breaths. I lived in a small farming town in Iowa, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and your business. My property sat on 80 acres of land, modest by farming standards, but it was mine. Well, it had been mine. The house was old, built in 1942 with wooden floors that creaked when you walked and windows that rattled in the winter wind. I had a chicken coop out back, a vegetable garden that I tended every spring, and a barn that had seen better days but still stood strong. For 35 years, I lived the life of a farmer. I woke up at 5 every morning, even in the dead of winter when the cold bit through your coat and turned your breath into clouds. I fed the chickens, collected eggs, tended to the soil, planted seeds, pulled weeds, harvested crops. My hands were rough and calloused, my face weathered from decades under the sun. I wore the same faded jeans and flannel shirts year after year, and I drove a 1998 Ford pickup truck that sputtered and coughed but kept running. People in town knew me as Farmer Essie, the woman who sold fresh eggs at the farmer's market, the woman who always had dirt under her fingernails and hay in her hair, the woman who lived simply, quietly, without fuss or pretension. But they didn't know the whole story. Nobody did. 20 years ago, I wasn't just a farmer. I was something else entirely, something I'd hidden away like a secret buried deep in the earth. I graduated from MIT with a degree in computer engineering back in 1985. I was good, really good at understanding systems and solving problems that made other people's heads spin. After graduation, I met a man named Gerald at a tech conference in Boston. We both had the same vision, using technology to help farmers work smarter, not harder. So we started a company together, just the two of us, in a cramped apartment, living on ramen noodles and coffee, writing code until 3 in the morning. We called it Agri-Tech Solutions. Our software helped farmers manage crop rotation, predict weather patterns, optimize irrigation systems, track soil health. It was revolutionary for its time. Within 5 years, we had clients across the Midwest. Within 10 years, we were worth millions. But then, my husband Thomas died. It was a stupid accident, the kind that happens too often on farms. A tractor rolled, pinned him underneath. He was gone before the ambulance even arrived. Our son Brandon was only 8 years old. I stood at Thomas's funeral holding Brandon's small hand, and I made a decision. I couldn't do both. I couldn't build a tech empire and raise my son. I couldn't travel to board meetings and be home for dinner. I couldn't be in Silicon Valley and on our family farm at the same time. So I chose Brandon. I chose my son. I sold most of my shares in Agritech Solutions to Gerald and the other investors. I kept 15% a silent stake that would generate dividend income, but I walked away from the day-to-day operations. I moved back to the farm full-time, the place where Thomas and I had planned to grow old together. Gerald understood. He promised to keep my involvement quiet, to let me disappear into the life I'd chosen, and he kept that promise. Over the next 2 decades, Agritech Solutions exploded. They expanded into international markets, developed new products, acquired smaller competitors. The company grew into a $485 million enterprise. My 15% stake, the shares I'd held onto all these years, was worth $72.75 million. But nobody knew. Not my neighbors, not the people at the farmer's market, not even my son. I lived on the farm collecting my dividends quietly, depositing them into accounts Brandon didn't know about. I lived simply because I wanted to, not because I had to. I wanted Brandon to grow up understanding the value of work, the dignity of labor, the importance of earning what you have. I didn't want to raise a spoiled rich kid who thought money grew on trees. I wanted him to be a good man, strong, honest, kind. I gave him everything I could. I paid for his college education at Northwestern, every penny of tuition, room, and board. I made sure he had opportunities I never had. When he graduated with a degree in business and moved to Chicago to start his career, I was so proud. My boy making his way in the world. He met a woman there, Lydia. She came from money, real money, the kind that bought summer homes and European vacations. They got married in a ceremony that cost more than most people make in a year. I flew out for the wedding wearing my best dress, the one I'd bought at a department store on sale. I remember feeling out of place among Lydia's family and friends, all of them dressed like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Lydia looked at me like I was a stain on her perfect day. I could see it in her eyes, the judgment, the disdain. She tolerated me because I was Brandon's mother, but barely. After that, Brandon's visits became less frequent. A few times a year, maybe. Always rushed, always with one eye on his phone. He'd ask about the farm in a polite, distant way, like he was asking about the weather. He never offered to help with repairs or maintenance. He never asked if I needed anything. But I told myself it was fine. He was busy. He had his own life. That's what children do. They grow up and move away. That's natural. Then, 6 months ago, everything changed. I started having trouble breathing. At first, I thought it was just age catching up with me, maybe allergies from all the dust and pollen. But it got worse. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, my chest tight and painful. Finally, I drove myself to the doctor. The tests came back 2 weeks later. Stage 4 lung cancer, aggressive, spreading fast. The doctor, a young woman with kind eyes, sat me down in her office and explained it in terms I couldn't misunderstand. 6 months, maybe less. There were treatments. We could try chemotherapy and radiation, but they'd only buy me a little time and make me sick in the process. I asked her to be honest. She was. I had months, not years. I needed to get my affairs in order. I called Brandon that same afternoon. My hands shook as I held the phone. "Mom," he answered, sounding distracted. I could hear traffic in the background. "Brandon, I need to tell you something." "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of—" "No," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "It can't wait." There was a pause. Then he pulled over. I could tell by the sudden quiet. "I have cancer," I told him. "Stage 4. The doctor says I have a few months." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, I'm so sorry." His voice sounded shocked, genuine. For a moment, I felt that connection again, that bond between mother and son. "I'll come see you, soon. I promise." "I'd like that," I whispered. "We'll figure this out together," he said. "You're not alone." I believed him. God help me, I believed him. I started preparing for the end. I called Harold Wright, my lawyer, for the past 20 years, the only person besides Gerald who knew about my stake in Agritech. Harold was 65, a cautious man with silver hair and reading glasses that always sat crooked on his nose. "Essie," he said, when I told him about the diagnosis, "I'm so sorry. I need to update my will," I told him. "I want to make sure everything goes to Brandon." Harold was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure all of it?" "He's my son Harold. Who else would I leave it to?" "All right," he said slowly. "I'll draft the documents." I hung up feeling satisfied, feeling like I'd done the right thing. My son would inherit everything. The farm, the money, the shares in Agritech. He'd be set for life. He'd never have to worry about anything. That feeling lasted exactly 3 weeks. Then my condition worsened. The pain became unbearable and I couldn't manage it at home anymore. The local hospital admitted me, put me in a small room on the 3rd floor with a window overlooking the fields. I lay there, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed, pumped full of morphine that made everything soft and hazy. I waited for Brandon to come, believing he would keep his promise, believing family still meant something. The first week in the hospital passed slowly. Nurses came and went, checking my vitals, adjusting my medication, speaking in soft voices that made me feel like I was already dead. Dorothy, my neighbor, visited every day. She brought me homemade soup and sat by my bed holding my hand and telling me stories about what was happening on her farm. Dorothy was 70 years old, a widow like me with white hair she kept in a neat bun and eyes that still sparkled with life. We'd been neighbors for 15 years, and she'd become more like a sister to me than just someone who lived down the road. "Brandon's coming soon," I told her on the third day. "He promised." Dorothy patted my hand but didn't say anything. The look in her eyes told me she had her doubts. On the fifth day, Brandon finally showed up. It was late afternoon, and I'd been dozing. I woke to find him standing in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit and designer shoes. He held his phone in one hand, his thumb moving across the screen. "Brandon," I said, my voice weak but happy. "You came." He looked up, almost startled, like he'd forgotten why he was there. "Hey, Mom." He walked over and gave me a quick, awkward hug, careful not to disturb any of the tubes and wires. "How are you feeling?" "I've been better." I tried to smile, "but I'm glad you're here." He pulled up a chair but didn't really sit in it, just perched on the edge like he might need to leave at any moment. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. "Where's Lydia?" I asked. "She couldn't make it. Work stuff." He didn't look at me when he said it. We sat in silence for a moment. I wanted to talk to him about so many things, about his childhood, about his father, about all the memories we shared. But he kept checking his phone, his leg bouncing with impatience. "So, Mom," he said finally, his tone shifting to something more businesslike, "we should probably talk about, practical matters. Practical matters. Your will, your assets. The farm." He leaned forward slightly. "You've got everything written down right, power of attorney, medical directives, all that stuff." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Harold has all the legal documents." Good, good," he nodded. "And the farm, that's your only asset, right? Just want to make sure I have a complete picture." I stared at him. My son was asking about my assets while I lay dying, asking like a businessman conducting an audit, not like a son worried about his mother. "Yes," I said quietly. "Just the farm." "Okay." He relaxed a little. "That's probably worth, what, maybe 800,750. Something like that." He nodded again, already calculating. I could see the wheels turning in his head. "And you've got power of attorney set up right in case you can't make decisions." "For medical decisions, yes, you're listed. What about financial property decisions?" I felt my chest tighten, and not from the cancer. "Brandon, why are you asking about this now?" "Mom, I'm just trying to help." He put his phone away, finally giving me his full attention. "You're sick. Someone needs to handle things. I'm your son. It makes sense for me to have authority to manage your affairs." The way he said, "manage your affairs," made me feel like a problem to be solved, not a person to be cared for. "Let me think about it," I said. His jaw tightened. "Mom, I drove 6 hours to be here. I'm trying to help you. Don't you trust me?" The question hung in the air between us. Did I trust him? I wanted to. He was my son, but something felt wrong. "Of course I trust you," I said, because what else could I say? He left 20 minutes later, claiming he had to get back to Chicago for an important meeting. He didn't hug me goodbye, just squeezed my shoulder and said he'd be in touch. After he left, I lay there staring at the ceiling. Dorothy came by that evening and found me crying. "What happened?" she asked, settling into the chair Brandon had barely used. "He asked about my assets," I whispered. "About power of attorney. He wants control." Dorothy's face hardened. "That boy needs to learn some respect." "He's under stress," I said, defending him even though I didn't believe it. "He's worried." Dorothy didn't argue, but I could see she disagreed. The next few days passed without word from Brandon. I called his cell phone twice. Both times it went to voicemail. I left messages asking him to call me back. He didn't. Then Dorothy came to visit with strange news. "Essie," she said, sitting down heavily. "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." My heart started pounding. "What?" "Yesterday afternoon there was a man at your farm. Young guy, maybe 30, wearing a suit. He had a clipboard and was walking around the property taking pictures, measuring things. I felt dizzy. What do you mean measuring? I drove over to ask what he was doing. He said he was conducting a property assessment. Dorothy reached for my hand. I called Brandon to ask if he knew anything about it. He said he'd hired someone to assess the farm for insurance purposes. Insurance? My voice came out strangled. I didn't ask for that. I know, honey. That's why I'm telling you. My mind raced. Why would Brandon have someone assessing the property without asking me unless... No, he wouldn't. But 2 days later, another neighbor, Pete Morrison, stopped by the hospital. Pete was 55, a farmer who'd lived next to my property for 20 years. He was a straightforward man who didn't sugarcoat anything. "Essie," he said, standing awkwardly at the foot of my bed, twisting his cap in his hands. "I saw something today I thought you should know about." "What is it, Pete?" "There's a for sale sign up near your property line. One of those real estate company signs." The room tilted. "What?" "I thought maybe you'd decided to sell, but then I thought, why would you do that while you're in here? So I called the number on the sign. They said the property's being listed for $850,000. He looked at me with concern. "Did you know about this?" I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The monitors started beeping frantically. "Essie." Pete's voice seemed far away. Nurses rushed in. They gave me something to calm down, and Pete had to leave. But before the medication pulled me under, one thought kept circling my mind. Brandon was selling my farm, while I was dying, without asking me. When I woke up the next morning, the fog of medication had cleared, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I asked a nurse if I could borrow her laptop. She hesitated, but I must have looked desperate enough that she agreed. I pulled up the internet browser with shaking hands and typed in the address of a local real estate website. It took me 3 tries because my fingers kept hitting the wrong keys, and there it was, my farm, my home, my life's work, listed for sale. The photos were recent, taken within the last week. They showed the house from every angle, the barn, the chicken coop, even the vegetable garden. The description read, "Charming 80-acre farm property, ideal for development or agricultural use. Owner motivated to sell." Owner motivated to sell. I scrolled down to the listing agent's information. Then I found the seller details. The property was being sold by Brandon Hartley, acting under power of attorney for Essie Hartley. But I never gave him power of attorney for property decisions, only for medical decisions if I became incapacitated. My hands trembled as I kept reading. The listing had been posted 5 days ago. There were already 3 offers pending. I grabbed my cell phone from the bedside table and called Brandon. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Brandon," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I saw the listing. Call me, now." I hung up and waited. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3, nothing. I called Harold Wright, my lawyer. "Essie," he answered on the second ring. "How are you feeling? Harold Brandon is selling the farm." Silence. "What do you mean he's selling it?" "It's listed online for $850,000. He's using power of attorney that I never gave him." I heard papers rustling. "Essie, let me pull your file." More rustling. "The power of attorney you signed was specifically for medical decisions only. He has no legal authority to sell your property." "Then how is he doing it?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Give me until tomorrow." That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark hospital room listening to machines beep and watching headlights from passing cars sweep across the ceiling. I thought about all the years I'd spent on that farm, all the work, all the memories. Thomas and I had bought that land together when we were newly married, full of dreams and hope. Brandon had grown up in that house, learned to walk in those fields, buried his first pet cat under the oak tree out back. And now, he was selling it like it meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. The next afternoon, Harold came to see me in person. His face was grim. "I did some investigating," he said, sitting down. "Brandon used the medical power of attorney you signed, but he had someone forge your signature on an additional document giving him financial authority. It's fraud, Essie. Clear-cut fraud." I closed my eyes. My own son. "There's more," Harold continued. "I spoke with the real estate agent. The sale is in contract." Brandon accepted an offer of $850,000. Closing is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. 3 weeks, I whispered. He thinks I'll be dead by then. Harold's silence confirmed it. The money from the sale, I asked, where does it go? According to the contract, directly into a bank account that Brandon controls. He set it up last month, naming himself as the beneficiary and manager of your estate. Harold leaned forward. Essie, this is theft. We can stop it. We can file charges. How long would that take? To stop the sale, I can file an emergency injunction today, but the fraud charges the legal proceedings that could take months, maybe longer. Months I didn't have. I looked out the window at the gray sky. Do you remember when I first came to you 20 years ago when I sold my shares in Agritech? Of course. I told you I wanted to protect my son. I wanted him to grow up normal, grounded, not spoiled by money. I remember. I failed Harold. I raised him, gave him everything, and this is what I get. He's waiting for me to die so he can cash in. You didn't fail, Harold said gently. He made his own choices. I thought about that. About choices, about consequences. File the injunction, I said. Stop the sale, but don't press criminal charges yet. Why not? Because I want him to show me exactly who he is. I want to see how far he'll go. Harold looked worried. Essie, trust me, I said. I have a plan. 2 days later, Brandon finally showed up. I was ready for him. He walked in looking annoyed, like I'd inconvenienced him by not dying fast enough. He didn't bring flowers, didn't bring anything. Mom, he said, standing at the foot of my bed. You called. I saw the listing, Brandon. His face didn't change. No guilt, no shame, just a slight tightening around his eyes. Yeah, he said. I was going to tell you. Were you? Look, Mom, be practical. You're dying. What do you need the farm for? The money from the sale will cover your medical bills and what? And give me something to start with. I'm your son. I deserve something for everything I've put up with. The words hit me like a physical blow. Everything he'd put up with, like raising him had been a burden he'd endured, not a gift I'd given. Brandon, that's my home. It's just property, Mom. Just land and an old house. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. He sighed, exasperated. Why are you making this so difficult? The sale is already in contract. It's happening whether you like it or not. Actually, I said quietly, it's not. My lawyer filed an injunction. The sale is stopped. His face went red. You did what? You forged my signature, Brandon. You committed fraud. You're lucky I haven't pressed criminal charges. He stepped closer, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that frightened me. Rage. Pure rage. You're going to regret this, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I already do, I said. I regret trusting you. He turned and walked out without another word. The door slammed behind him. I lay there, my heart racing, the monitors beeping faster. A nurse rushed in to check on me. Are you all right, Mrs. Hartley? No, I wanted to say I'm not all right. My son just showed me he values money more than his dying mother, but I just nodded and let her adjust my medication. The next week was a nightmare. Brandon didn't visit. He didn't call. But I heard from Harold that Brandon was trying to challenge the injunction, claiming I wasn't mentally competent to make decisions about my own property. He was trying to have me declared incapacitated. My own son wanted me declared mentally incompetent so he could steal my farm. Dorothy sat with me when Harold delivered that news. I couldn't cry anymore. I'd run out of tears. What kind of person does this? I asked the room, the universe, God, whoever was listening. How did I raise someone who could do this to me? Dorothy squeezed my hand. You didn't raise him to be this way, honey. He chose it himself. But I couldn't help feeling responsible. All those years trying to teach him values, trying to show him what mattered in life, and this is what he became. A man so consumed by greed that he'd betray his dying mother. That afternoon, I overheard something that shattered what was left of my heart. Brandon had come back to the hospital, but not to see me. He was in the hallway outside my room talking to someone. I recognized the voice. Lydia, his wife. I pretended to be asleep. So, it's really done, Lydia's voice carried through the partially open door. The farm is sold. Almost, Brandon replied. Just waiting for final papers. The old bat tried to stop it, but I'll get around the injunction. My lawyer says we can prove she's not mentally competent. Finally, that old place was worthless anyway. Tell me about it, but $850,000 is better than nothing. Lydia laughed a cold, brittle sound. The sooner she's gone, the sooner we can move on with our lives. Seriously, Brandon agreed. She never had much anyway, just dirt and chickens, poor old farmer. They both laughed. I lay there frozen as their footsteps faded down the hallway. They never even came into my room. Poor old farmer, that's what my son thought of me. That's all I was to him. A poor old farmer with nothing to offer except an inheritance he felt entitled to. The pain I felt in that moment had nothing to do with cancer. It was a different kind of death, the death of the last bit of hope I'd been clinging to. The hope that, somewhere deep down, my son still loved me. But he didn't. He was just waiting for me to die. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and called Gerald in California. We hadn't spoken in almost a year, but he answered on the first ring. Essie. His voice was warm, concerned. I heard you were sick. I've been meaning to call, I'm so sorry. Gerald, I interrupted. I need your help. Anything, name it. I need you to help me destroy my son. There was a long pause. Tell me everything, he said. Over the next 2 days, I told Gerald the whole story about Brandon selling the farm, about the fraud, about overhearing him call me a poor old farmer while he waited for me to die. Gerald was furious. After everything you did for him, Essie, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, I said. Help me teach him a lesson he'll never forget. What do you want to do? I want to go public. I want to tell everyone who I really am. I want Brandon to know exactly what he threw away when he chose greed over family. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Are you sure? Once this information is out there, your privacy is gone. Everyone will know about your stake in Agritech, about the money. I don't care anymore. I'm dying anyway. What's privacy worth when you're dead? All right, Gerald said. I'll set it up. We'll hold a press conference, make a big announcement, show the world who Essie Hartley really is. And Gerald, I want to change my will. All of it. I figured you might. I called Harold next, told him about my conversation with Gerald and my plans. Essie, Harold said carefully, are you absolutely certain about this disinheriting your son is a major decision? He disinherited himself when he called me worthless. All right, what do you want to do with the estate? I'd been thinking about that, about who deserved my money, my legacy, my life's work. Not Brandon, that was certain, but who I want to create a foundation, I told Harold. Something to help single mothers who are farmers, women who are trying to do what I did, raise children alone while working the land. They need support, education, resources. That's beautiful, Essie. Brandon gets $1. Not because I forgot him, but because I want him to know I remembered him and chose to give him nothing. And the farm. I thought about that. The farm goes to Dorothy. She'll know what to do with it. She'll turn it into something good. Harold was quiet for a moment. This is going to devastate him, you know. Good, I said. Let him feel a fraction of what he made me feel. The press conference was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Gerald flew to Iowa to handle the arrangements. He rented a conference room at a hotel in Des Moines and invited every major news outlet in the region. Business journalists, technology reporters, even some national media. The announcement went out the day before Agritech Solutions founder to make major announcement about company's origins and future. People were curious. Agritech was worth $485 million. Any news about the company was big news. I discharged myself from the hospital against medical advice. The doctors protested, said I needed to stay, but I insisted. Dorothy picked me up and took me to her house where I could rest and prepare for the press conference. Are you sure about this? Dorothy asked as she helped me into her guest bedroom. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The next morning, Gerald helped me get ready. I wore a simple blue dress, nothing fancy, just clean and presentable. My hair was thin from the cancer, my face gaunt, but my eyes were clear and determined. We drove to Des Moines together. Dorothy came with us, holding my hand in the back seat. The conference room was packed with reporters, cameras, lights. Gerald stood at the podium looking professional in his suit. Thank you all for coming, he began. I'm Gerald Chen, CEO of Agritech Solutions. Today I'm here to share a story that's been kept private for 20 years. A story about the woman who co-founded this company with me, a woman whose vision and brilliance helped create the technology that transformed modern farming. He paused, letting the anticipation build. Most of you know her as Essie Hartley, a farmer from a small town in Iowa. But what you don't know is that Essie holds 15% of Agritech Solutions. She's been a silent partner since the company's inception. And today, with her permission, I'm sharing her story. Cameras flashed. Reporters started murmuring. Gerald told them everything. About how we'd started the company together, about the software we'd developed, about how I'd walked away after my husband died to raise my son alone, about how I'd chosen family over fortune, simplicity over success. Essie Hartley is battling stage 4 cancer. Gerald continued, his voice heavy with emotion. She doesn't have much time left, but before she passes, she wanted the world to know her story. Not for glory or recognition, but because she has an important message about what really matters in life. He stepped aside and gestured to me. I walked slowly to the podium, leaning on Dorothy for support. The room fell silent. My name is Essie Hartley. I said, my voice weak but steady. I'm 58 years old and I'm dying. My 15% stake in Agritech Solutions is worth approximately $72.75 million. For 20 years, I've lived as a farmer, quietly collecting dividends, saving money, living simply. I paused, gathering strength. I did this because I wanted my son to grow up understanding the value of work, of honesty, of integrity. I didn't want to raise a child who thought money was the most important thing in life. My voice cracked slightly. But I failed, because while I was lying in a hospital bed dying, my son tried to sell my farm without my knowledge or permission. He forged legal documents. He committed fraud. And when I confronted him, he called me a poor old farmer. He said I never amounted to anything. Gasps from the reporters. So today I'm here to announce that my son Brandon Hartley will inherit exactly $1 from my estate. Not because I forgot him, but because I want him to know that I remembered him and chose to give him nothing. The rest of my fortune will go to the Second Harvest Foundation, a charity I'm establishing to help single mothers who work in agriculture. The room erupted with questions, but I raised my hand for silence. I'm also here to say something to anyone watching this who might be facing betrayal from someone they love. Your worth is not determined by how others treat you. My son thought I was worthless, but he was wrong. I built something meaningful. I helped people. I lived with dignity. That's what matters. I stepped back from the podium, exhausted. The story went viral within hours. Brandon saw the press conference. I know because he called 37 times that afternoon. I didn't answer. Finally, he showed up at Dorothy's house, pounding on the door. Dorothy answered, blocking the doorway. She doesn't want to see you. She's my mother. She can't do this. She already did. I need to talk to her. There has to be an explanation. I appeared behind Dorothy, steadying myself against the doorframe. Brandon looked terrible. His eyes were wild, his hair messy, his expensive suit wrinkled. Mom, he breathed. I just saw the news. Is it true? Every word. But you never said anything. You let me think you were poor. I wanted you to grow up valuing hard work, not money, I said, my voice tired. I wanted to see who you really were. And now I know. Mom, please, we need to talk about your will. You can't give everything away. I'm your son. You stopped being my son when you sold my home behind my back. His face crumpled. I made a mistake. I was stressed. Lydia was pressuring me. Please, Mom, don't cut me out. I'm sorry. Are you sorry for what you did or sorry that you got caught? He opened his mouth, closed. It opened it again. I don't know. At least he was honest about that. Brandon, I gave you every opportunity to be a good person. I paid for your education. I supported your dreams. I loved you unconditionally. And when I needed you most, when I was dying, you chose greed over family. What if I change? What if I prove I can be better? Then change for yourself, not for my money. Become the man I always hoped you'd be, but don't do it expecting a reward. Mom, please. Goodbye, Brandon. I stepped back into the house. Dorothy closed the door. We could hear him crying on the porch, but eventually he left. I never saw him again. The legal fallout was swift. Brandon tried to contest the will, but Harold had prepared everything perfectly. Brandon's fraud was well documented. His attempts to have me declared mentally incompetent failed when 3 doctors testified that I was completely lucid and capable of making my own decisions. The media coverage was relentless. My story was everywhere. News shows, podcasts, social media. Everyone had an opinion. Most people supported me. They saw Brandon as a greedy son who got what he deserved, but some criticized me too. They said I should have been more forgiving. That family is family no matter what. I didn't care. I knew the truth. I'd given Brandon every chance. He'd made his choices. Within a month, Brandon lost his job. His company didn't want the negative publicity associated with his name. Lydia filed for divorce when she realized there was no inheritance coming. He lost everything. People said I destroyed his life. Maybe I did, but he destroyed mine first. The farm sale was permanently blocked. I used part of my agri-tech dividends to buy back the property at a premium, then legally transferred ownership to Dorothy. "Essie, I can't accept this," Dorothy protested. "Yes, you can. You've been more family to me than my own blood. This farm deserves someone who'll love it. Promise me you'll turn it into something good." She did. Dorothy converted the property into a community center for women farmers, a place where they could learn new techniques, share resources, support each other. It became exactly what I'd always hoped the farm could be. The Second Harvest Foundation officially launched 2 months after the press conference. Gerald agreed to serve on the board. Within the first year, we helped 300 women get the training and resources they needed to succeed as farmers. Every time I heard a success story, someone whose life had been changed by the foundation, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I spent my final months at Dorothy's house. She took care of me as my body slowly failed. The cancer spread. The pain increased. But somehow I felt more at peace than I'd been in years. Friends visited, old neighbors, people I'd helped over the years. Gerald flew in from California and sat by my bed for hours reminiscing about the early days of agritech. "Do you regret it?" he asked one afternoon, walking away from the company. "No," I said honestly. "I don't regret raising Brandon. I only regret that he didn't become the man I hoped he'd be, but that's on him, not me." "You know he's trying to rebuild his life," Gerald said carefully. "I heard he's working construction now, living in a small apartment. Lydia took him to the cleaners in the divorce." "Good. He's been writing you letters. Dorothy's been intercepting them." I'd known about the letters. Dorothy had asked if I wanted to read them. I'd said no. "Does he deserve a second chance?" Gerald asked. I thought about that for a long time. "Maybe, someday, but not from me. I don't have the strength left to forgive him. Let him earn his redemption somewhere else." As the weeks passed, I felt myself fading. The morphine made everything soft and distant. I spent hours staring out the window watching the seasons change. Spring came early that year. The fields turned green. Life continued as it always does. One morning, I woke to find Dorothy sitting beside my bed, holding my hand. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Tired," I admitted. "So tired." "Would you like me to read to you?" "No, I just want to talk, while I still can." She settled in her chair, her weathered face kind and patient. "Do you know what I've been thinking about?" I asked. "What's that honey?" Brandon called me a poor old farmer, and you know what? He was right about one thing. I was a farmer. I spent 35 years working this land, getting dirt under my fingernails, feeding chickens, growing food, and I loved it. That work had meaning. It had value. Of course it did. But I was never poor. Not in the ways that mattered. I had love. I had purpose. I had dignity. I squeezed Dorothy's hand. I had friends who showed up when I needed them. That's not poor. That's rich beyond measure. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "You're the richest person I've ever known, Essie." Brandon thought money was everything. He thought without it I was worthless. But he was wrong. My worth had nothing to do with my bank account. It had to do with how I lived, how I treated people, what I built, and who I helped. "You helped so many people, honey." I tried. I tried to help him too, but he didn't want to be helped. He wanted to be rich." "That's his loss." I nodded slowly. "Do you think I was too hard on him?" Dorothy was quiet for a moment, considering. "No, I think you loved him enough to let him face the consequences of his actions. That's harder than just forgiving and forgetting. You gave him the truth, even though it hurt. I hope he learns from it. I hope someday he becomes a better man. Maybe he will. But it won't be for me. I won't be here to see it. No, Dorothy said softly. You won't. The days blurred together after that. I drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes I dreamed about Thomas, about when we were young and full of plans. Sometimes I dreamed about Brandon as a little boy laughing and running through the fields. I didn't have nightmares anymore. No regrets. I'd done what I needed to do. I'd stood up for myself. I'd protected my dignity. I'd turned my pain into something useful, something that would help others long after I was gone. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, I felt a profound sense of completion. My work was done. My story was told. My legacy was secure. I thought about all the women who would benefit from the Second Harvest Foundation, all the single mothers who would get help, support, resources. They'd know they weren't alone. They'd know their work had value. That was worth more than any amount of money I could have left to Brandon. As darkness fell, I closed my eyes. Dorothy was still there holding my hand. I could hear her humming softly, an old song my mother used to sing. Thank you, I whispered. For what? For being family when my family wasn't. Oh, honey, she said, her voice breaking. You never had to thank me for that. I smiled. It was getting harder to breathe now, but I wasn't afraid. I'd made my peace with death months ago. Dorothy, yes. Tell them my story. Tell all those women in the foundation. Tell them that their worth isn't measured by how others treat them. Tell them they're valuable, important, worthy, even if their own children can't see it. I will, I promise. And tell them that sometimes the greatest wealth is knowing who you are and never letting anyone make you feel small. I'll tell them, Dorothy whispered. I felt her squeeze my hand one last time. The pain was fading now. Everything was fading. But I wasn't sad. I'd lived a good life. I'd loved deeply. I'd worked hard. I'd made a difference. My son had called me a poor old farmer, but he was wrong. I was never poor. Not where it counted. I had loved. I had given. I had stood up for myself when it mattered most. And in the end, that made me richer than he'd ever understand. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family and your own dignity? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it, someone who's struggling to stand up for themselves. Remember, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. It's determined by how you treat yourself, by the choices you make, by the legacy you leave behind. Thank you for listening to my story. May you always know your own value, and may you never let anyone convince you that you're less than you are. Take care of yourselves. Stand tall. And remember, family is the people who show up when you need them, not just the people who share your blood. Until next time.